Welcome to today's explainer. If you've ever stood in front of a classroom, you know the delicate balancing act of teaching a really challenging new concept. You absolutely want to push your students to new heights, but you also want to avoid that sheer cognitive overload that just leaves them frustrated and totally disengaged. It's a super common problem. But what if we thought about building a student's mind the exact same way a construction crew builds a skyscraper? Well, ideally with fewer hard hats and a lot less heavy machinery. Today, we are exploring the incredibly powerful concept of instructional scaffolding. It's a foundational framework designed to systematically build student independence. So, let's dive right in and see how we can actually engineer deeper learning.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Origins of the metaphor. 2. The core mechanics. 3. The teacher's responsibilities. 4. Monitoring group activities. And 5. Fading to independence. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1. Origins of the metaphor, building the blueprint.
So, the crucial point we need to understand is right here in this definition. Instructional scaffolding isn't just a fancy word for helping a student. It is specifically defined as temporary, highly responsive support that enables a learner to successfully participate in a challenging task they just couldn't pull off alone. Think about a physical scaffold on a building site, right? It supports the workers and the materials only while the structure is being built, and then it's totally removed once the building can stand on its own 2 feet. In our classrooms, the goal of scaffolding is absolutely never to simply make a task easier. The goal is to make independent performance possible. It's about keeping the task's complexity totally intact while providing a temporary framework so the student can actually navigate it.
Now, the intellectual lineage of scaffolding is actually fascinating. The term itself wasn't formally introduced to educational psychology until 1976, but its roots go way back. In the 1930s, Lev Vygotsky theorized that socially mediated learning allows students to reach potentials they just couldn't reach alone. Then, jumping to the 50s and 60s, Jerome Bruner studied how parents unconsciously create these highly structured routines, or formats, to help infants acquire language. But it was in 1976 that David Wood, Jerome Bruner, and Gail Ross formally coined the term scaffolding. They were observing how adults helped young kids put together this really complex 3-dimensional wooden pyramid puzzle, a task that was initially way beyond the kids' abilities. And here's the kicker. The adults didn't do the puzzle for them. They just controlled the elements that were too difficult, allowing the children to focus completely on what they could manage.
Let's move on to Section 2, the core mechanics, constructing the framework.
To really understand how scaffolding works, we have to contrast 2 states of learning, which perfectly illustrates Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, or ZPD. On one side, we have what a student can currently do entirely unassisted. On the other side, we have what that exact same student can achieve when provided with targeted, temporary adult guidance. The space right between those 2 states? That is the ZPD. This is literally where the magic happens. Scaffolding is the operational mechanism that sits right inside this zone. By intervening at the exact right time with the exact right level of support, the teacher bridges that gap, pulling the student's cognitive capabilities forward.
And this brings us to the 3 absolute requirements of true scaffolding, based on the research of Van de Poel and colleagues. First up is contingency. This means your support must be highly responsive and matched perfectly to the learner's current understanding. You diagnose where they are and adjust dynamically. Like realizing a student just needs a quick hint, not the whole answer. Second is fading. As the learner's competence grows, you don't just keep helping them, you actively, gradually withdraw that support. And third is the transfer of responsibility. This is the ultimate goal, where the control of the task shifts entirely from the teacher over to the student. And listen, if you are missing any of these 3 elements, contingency, fading, or transfer, you might be helping, sure, but you aren't scaffolding.
Section 3, the teacher's responsibilities, the role of the foreman.
So, the framework of cognitive apprenticeship, which was developed by researchers Alan Collins, John Seeley Brown, and Susan Newman, outlines 6 really vital teaching responsibilities. First is modeling, where the teacher actually performs the task thinking out loud so students can build a conceptual model of how an expert processes information. Then comes coaching, so observing the students as they try it out, offering little hints and feedback. Third is scaffolding, which is the targeted support we've been talking about. Fourth is articulation. This one is absolutely critical. You have to get students to explicitly state their knowledge and reasoning out loud. Fifth is reflection, which enables students to compare their own problem solving with an expert's or even a peer's. And finally, exploration, where we push students to pose and solve their own problems. Every single one of these steps is strategically designed to externalize the internal thinking process. We're making those invisible cognitive skills totally visible to the learner.
Let's look just a bit closer at this original text excerpt from the Cognitive Apprenticeship framework.
It's super important to distinguish between coaching and scaffolding here. Coaching is broad. It's the general observation, the feedback, those little reminders you provide while a student is working away. Scaffolding, however, is much narrower. It refers to the specific, targeted supports you inject to help the learner carry out an exact task. So it could be a physical cue card to help them structure a writing assignment, or maybe a really specific prompt in a tricky math problem. Scaffolding literally decomposes the task so the student can manage it step by step.
Moving it to Section 4, monitoring group activities, inspecting the job site. Now, group work is fantastic for collaborative learning, but we all know it requires careful monitoring to ensure we're getting productive struggle and not just shared confusion. Educational researcher Schoenfeld developed this brilliant strategy for monitoring his math groups. He'd act as a sort of consultant as they worked. He would regularly interrupt groups with 3 diagnostic questions. First, what are you doing? Second, why are you doing it? And third, how will success in what you are doing help you find a solution? Think about it. If students are stuck on a physics problem, interrupting to ask, why are you doing it, stops them from blindly plugging numbers into a formula. It forces them to justify their strategy. It completely promotes self-monitoring. And over time, as students begin to anticipate the teacher asking these questions, they start asking the questions of themselves. They fully internalize that metacognitive control. It's a real game changer. This quote from Collins, Brown, and Newman really anchors our whole discussion of group work. When a teacher models expert strategies in a shared problem context, it allows students to immediately compare their own efforts to the experts. By decomposing a massive, intimidating task, you aren't just saving them from frustration, you are literally pulling back the curtain and showing them the hidden mental steps experts take to find the answer. That builds immense confidence. And in group settings, peer scaffolding can happen too, where knowledge is distributed throughout the whole group, allowing students to learn from each other's distinct zones of proximal development.
And finally, Section 5, fading to independence, taking down the scaffold. So, this matrix beautifully visualizes the gradual release of responsibility, which you've probably heard called the I do, we do, you do model. In Phase 1, the I do phase, teacher responsibility is high and student responsibility is low. You're the one modeling the task. In Phase 2, the we do phase, you shift into guided practice. The cognitive load is shared, medium to medium. Here, you might transition by having them solve a problem in pairs while you circulate, or maybe by providing a paragraph template where they only have to fill in the key arguments. Then, through contingent fading, we finally reach Phase 3, the you do phase. Here, teacher responsibility is low and student responsibility is high. You have systematically withdrawn the cue cards, the templates, all that direct assistance. The external prompts have officially become the student's internal voice.
So I want to leave you with this provocative challenge as you look at your lesson plans this week. How will you build the scaffold tomorrow so they won't need you the day after? Remember, true instructional scaffolding is a dynamic, highly responsive cycle. The ultimate goal of all our classroom construction, of literally every prompt, model, and guided question we provide, is our own obsolescence. We build the scaffolding precisely so it can be torn down, revealing an independent, capable learner standing strong on their own. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. And hey, happy building!